If, during this discourse, anything is said which is opposed to your way of thinking and belief, just listen, do not resist. You may be right, and I may be wrong, but by listening and considering together, we are going to find out what is the truth. Truth cannot be given to you by somebody. You have to discover it. And to discover, there must be a state of mind in which there is direct perception. There is no direct perception when there is resistance. I'm going to point out to you what is, and not translate it according to my fancy, nor should you translate it or interpret it according to your background or training. We can have understanding of what is when we recognize it without condemnation, without justification, without identification. To know that one is in a certain condition, in a certain state, is already a process of liberation. But a man who is not aware of his condition, of his struggle, tries to be something other than he is, which is habit. To follow it, you need a very swift mind and a pliable heart, which are denied when the mind is static, fixed in a belief, in a prejudice, in an identification. And a mind and heart that are dry cannot follow easily, swiftly, that which is. Be aware of it as I discuss it. Follow not my words, but the thought which is active in you. What we are trying to do is to follow each other's thoughts, to pursue as far as we can, as profoundly as we can, the intimations, the responses to our feelings. So please, find out what your response is to this cause, to this suffering, not what somebody else's words are, but how you yourself respond. Society is what you and I, in our relationship, have created. It is the outward projection of all our own inward psychological states. Understanding myself is not a matter of time. I can understand myself at this very moment. When you are interested in something, you do it instantaneously. There is immediate understanding, immediate transformation. When that happens, you are completely without a problem, for then the self is not worried about itself. Before we can have any relationship with another, which is society, it is essential that we begin to understand ourselves first. I consider the earnest person to be one who is completely concerned with this, first, and not with how to arrive at a particular goal. To follow oneself, to see how one's thought operates, one has to be extraordinarily alert to the intricacies of one's own thinking, and responses and feelings. One begins to have a greater awareness, not only of oneself, but of another with whom one is in relationship. Self-knowledge has no end. You don't come to an achievement, you don't come to a conclusion. Only when the mind is tranquil, through self-knowledge, and not through imposed self-discipline. Only then, in that tranquility, in that silence, can reality come into being. It is only then that there can be bliss, that there can be creative action. Then perhaps there can be a transformation in the immediate relationship about us, and so in the world in which we live. Society is the product of our relationship, and if our relationship is confused, egocentric, narrow, limited, national, we project that and bring chaos into the world. There must be a certain amount of imitation, copying in outward technique, but when there is inward psychological imitation, surely we cease to be creative. One of the fundamental causes of the disintegration of society is copying, which is the worship of authority. The world is our relationship, however narrow, and if we can bring a transformation there, not a superficial but a radical transformation, then we shall begin actively to transform the world. To find these true values which will bring about a radical revolution, a transformation or a regeneration, it is essential to understand oneself. Discontent, instead of setting us aflame, causing us to question life, the whole process of existence, is canalized, and thereby we become mediocre, losing that drive, that intensity to find out the whole significance of existence. To transform oneself, self-knowledge is essential. Without knowing what you are, there is no basis for right thought, and without knowing yourself, there cannot be transformation. If you want to know what you are, you cannot imagine or have belief in something which you are not. The understanding of what you are, without distortion, is the beginning of virtue. Virtue is essential, for it gives freedom. It is only in virtue that you can discover, that you can live, not in the cultivation of a virtue, which merely brings about respectability. In order to create a new world, a new structure away from the old, there must be freedom to discover, and to be free there must be virtue, for without virtue there is no freedom. And to understand what is, there must be freedom, freedom from the fear of what is. To understand that process, there must be the intention to know what is, to follow every thought, feeling, and action. When one is interested in understanding what is, the actual state of mind, one does not need to force, discipline, or control it. On the contrary, there is passive alertness, watchfulness. This state of awareness comes when there is interest, the intention to understand. If we merely accumulate knowledge of the self, that very knowledge prevents further understanding, because accumulated knowledge and experience becomes the centre through which thought focuses, and has its being. When we follow a method, we must have authorities, the teacher, the guru, the saviour, the master, who will guarantee us what we desire. Authority, in its very nature, prevents the full awareness of oneself, and therefore ultimately destroys freedom. In freedom alone can there be creativeness. The understanding of oneself is seeing oneself from moment to moment in the mirror of relationship, one's relationship to property, to things, to people, and to ideas. Creativeness comes only when the self, which is the process of recognition and accumulation, ceases to be, because, after all, consciousness, as the me, is the centre of recognition, and recognition is merely the process of the accumulation of experience. In order to transform the world about us, with its misery, wars, unemployment, starvation, class divisions, and utter confusion, there must be a transformation in ourselves. If we can understand ourselves as we are from moment to moment, without the process of accumulation, then we shall see how there comes a tranquillity that is not a product of the mind, a tranquillity that is neither imagined nor cultivated, and only in that state of tranquillity can there be creativeness. Consciousness is challenge and response, which is experiencing, then terming or naming, and then recording, which is memory. This process is action. The actor comes into being when action has a result, an end in view. The desire to achieve an end brings about will, which is the actor. These three states which constitute experience, the actor, action, and the result, are surely a process of becoming. We are in this state repeatedly, in the state of experiencing, but we always come out of it and give it a term, naming and recording it, and thereby giving continuity to becoming. If an idea shapes action, then action can never bring about the solution to our miseries, because, before it can be put into action, we have to discover how the idea comes into being. Idea is the outcome of a thought process. The response of a memory to a certain experience brings the thought process into action. You have to find out for yourself, inwardly, whether you are acting on an idea, and if there can be action without ideation. That is the only state in which there is understanding, when the mind, based on experience, is not guiding action, when thought, based on experience, is not shaping action. Love is not the thinking about the person that one loves, for then it is merely thought. You cannot think of love. Therefore love is not an experience. There is no gap between love and action, as there is between idea and action. One has to be aware of this total process, of how ideas come into being, how action springs from ideas, and how ideas control action, and therefore limit action, depending on sensation. Only when one can go beyond the bundle of ideas, which is the me, which is the mind, which has a partial or complete continuity, only when one can go beyond that, when thought is completely silent, is there a state of experiencing. Then one shall know what truth is. This, after all, is the truth, to have the capacity of meeting everything anew from moment to moment, without the conditioning reaction of the past, so that there is not the cumulative effect, which acts as a barrier between oneself and that which is. A belief, religious or political, obviously hinders the understanding of ourselves. It acts as a screen through which we are looking at ourselves. If we have no beliefs with which the mind has identified itself, then the mind, without identification, is capable of looking at itself as it is. And then, surely, there is the beginning of the understanding of oneself. A man who wants peace, and who wants to create a new world, a happy world, surely cannot isolate himself through any form of belief. If you see the significance and validity and the truth of it, it will begin to act. We want to be secure inwardly, and also spiritually, by erecting walls of belief, which are an indication of the craving to be certain. Can the mind free itself from belief? Not find a substitute for it, but be entirely free from it? You cannot verbally answer yes or no to this, but you can definitely give an answer if your intention is to become free from belief. When you go behind it, analyze it, look at it more intelligently and carefully, you will find that the very assertion, I know, is another wall separating you and me. Behind that wall you take refuge, seeking comfort, security. Therefore, the more knowledge a mind is burdened with, the less capable it is of understanding. If we would live at peace with each other, surely ambition must completely come to an end. Not only political, economic, social ambition, but also the more subtle and pernicious ambition, the spiritual ambition to be something. If you would find something new, experience something which is not a projection of your own imagination, your mind must be free. Unfortunately, every time you see something new, you bring in all the information known to you already, all your knowledge, all your past memories, and obviously you become incapable of looking, incapable of receiving anything that is new, that is not the old. We are discussing knowledge that is used as a means to security, the psychological and inward desire to be something. You can only be free from it when you understand the inward nature of the causes that make you hold on to it, not only the conscious, but the unconscious motives as well, that make you believe. We can find out the deeper conscious and unconscious activities if we give the unconscious mind a chance, because it is much quicker in response than the conscious mind. While your conscious mind is quietly thinking, listening and watching, the unconscious mind is much more active, much more alert and much more receptive. It can therefore have an answer. When we see the falseness of all this, the mind then is capable, it may be temporarily for a second, of seeing the truth of it, even though when it is too much for it, it goes back. But to see temporarily is sufficient. If you can see it for a fleeting second, it is enough, because you will then see an extraordinary thing take place. The unconscious is at work, though the conscious may reject. It is not a progressive second, but that second is the only thing, and it will have its own results, even in spite of the conscious mind struggling against it. Belief and knowledge are the process of recognition, the centre of the mind. The process is enclosing, the process is conscious, as well as unconscious. In the mind is the very basis which creates contradiction, which isolates and separates. A man of peace, a man of earnestness, cannot isolate himself and yet talk of brotherhood and peace. A man who is really earnest about this, who wants to discover, has to face the problem of knowledge and belief. He has to go behind it, to discover the whole process of desire at work, the desire to be secure, the desire to be certain. A mind that would be in a state in which the new can take place, whether it be the truth, whether it be God, or what you will, must surely cease to acquire, to gather. It must put aside all knowledge. When do you create? Surely when there is no effort, when you are completely open, when on all levels you are in complete communication, completely integrated. To understand the state of being without strife, that state of creative existence, surely one must inquire into the problem of effort. We mean by effort the striving to fulfill oneself, to become something. In this struggle, we are concerned inevitably with fulfillment through the gaining of an end. We seek self-fulfillment in an object, in a person, in an idea, and that demands constant battle, struggle, the effort to become, to fulfill. Because I am nothing, because I am insufficient, empty, inwardly poor, I struggle to become something, outwardly or inwardly. I struggle to fulfill myself in a person, in a thing, in an idea. To fill that void is the whole process of existence. There is effort only when there is an escape from that inward void through action, through contemplation, through acquisition, through achievement, through power, and so on. That is our daily existence. Therefore, action as we know it is really reaction. It is a ceaseless becoming, which is the denial, the avoidance of what is. But when there is awareness of emptiness without choice, without condemnation or justification, then, in that understanding of what is, there is action. And this action is creative being. You will understand this if you are aware of yourself in action, observing yourself as you are acting not only outwardly, but see also the movement of your thoughts and feeling. When you are aware of this movement, you will see that the thought process, which is also feeling and action, is based on the idea of becoming. The idea of becoming arises only when there is a sense of insecurity, and that sense of inward security comes when one is aware of the inward void. Through self-knowledge, through constant awareness, you will find that strife, battle, the conflict of becoming, leads you to pain, to sorrow, and ignorance. It is only if you are aware of the inward insufficiency and live with it without escape, accepting it wholly, that you will discover an extraordinary tranquility, which comes with understanding of what is. Only in that state of tranquility is there creative thinking. There is contradiction, so there must be struggle, and struggle is destruction, waste. In that state we can produce nothing but antagonism, strife, more bitterness and sorrow. If we can understand this fully, and hence be free of contradiction, then there can be inward peace, which will bring understanding of each other. If I regard life not as a permanent desire, but as a series of temporary desires, which are constantly changing, then there is no contradiction. Contradiction arises only when the mind has a fixed point of desire. That is when the mind does not regard all desire as moving, transient, but seizes upon one desire and makes that into a permanency. Only then, when other desires arise, is there contradiction. You are seeking lasting gratification, and that gratification you clothe with an idea, a respectable sounding word such as God, truth. The mind is the product of time. Thought is based on yesterday, on the past. And so long as thought is functioning within the field of time, thinking in terms of the future, of becoming, gaining, achieving, there must be contradiction, because then we are capable of looking at what is. Only in realizing, in understanding, in being choicelessly aware of what is there a possibility of freedom from that disintegrating factor which is contradiction. Therefore it is essential to understand the whole process of our thinking, for it is there that we find contradiction. Thought itself has become a contradiction because we have not understood the total process of ourselves, and that understanding is possible only when we are fully aware of our thought, not as an observer operating upon his thought, but integrally and without choice, which is extremely arduous. Then only is there the dissolution of that contradiction which is so detrimental, so painful. So long as we are trying to achieve a psychological result, so long as we want inward security, there must be a contradiction in our life. To be fully aware of the present is an extraordinarily difficult task because the mind is incapable of facing a fact directly without deception. Thought is the product of the past, and therefore it can only think in terms of the past or of the future. It cannot be completely aware of a fact in the present. So long as thought, which is the product of the past, tries to eliminate contradiction and all the problems that it creates, it is merely pursuing a result, trying to achieve an end, and such thinking only creates more contradiction and hence conflict, misery, and confusion in us, and therefore about us. To be free of contradiction, one must be aware of the present without choice. How can there be choice when you are confronted with a fact? Surely, the understanding of the fact is made impossible so long as thought is trying to operate upon the fact in terms of becoming, changing, altering. Therefore, self-knowledge is the beginning of understanding. No expert, no specialist can show us how to understand the process of the self. One has to study it, or oneself. You and I can help each other by talking about it, but none can unfold it for us. No specialist, no teacher can explore it for us. We can be aware of it only in our relationship to things, to property, to people, and to ideas. In relationship, we shall discover that contradiction arises when action is approximating itself to an idea. The idea is merely the crystallization of thought as a symbol, and the effort to live up to the symbol brings about a contradiction. Thus, so long as there is a pattern of thought, contradiction will continue. To put an end to the pattern, and so to contradiction, there must be self-knowledge. Then only is there a possibility of that tranquillity of mind in which alone the ultimate reality can come into being. The self. By that I mean the idea, the memory, the conclusion, the experience, the various forms of nameable and unnameable intentions, the conscious endeavour to be or not to be, the accumulated memory of the unconscious, the racial, the group, the individual, the clan, and the whole of it, all. Whether it is projected outwardly in action, or projected spiritually as virtue, the striving after all this is the self. In it is included the competition, the desire to be. The self is dividing, the self is self-enclosing. Its activities, however noble, are separative and isolating. There is the constant interplay between what is seen objectively and our reaction to it, and interplay between the conscious and the memories of the unconscious. According to my memories, I react to whatever I see, to whatever I feel. The naming of that reaction is experience. There is no experience unless there is a naming process going on at the same time. I want to understand what is truth. That is my desire, my longing. Then there follows my projection of what I consider to be the truth, because I have read lots about it. The very want, the very desire is projected, and I experience because I recognize that projected state. If I did not recognize that state, I would not call it truth. I recognize it, and I experience it, and that experience gives strength to the self, to the me. The more you are entrenched in your experience, the more does the self get strengthened. As a result of this, you have a certain strength of character, strength of knowledge, of belief, which you display to other people. Because the self is still acting, so your beliefs, your masters, your castes, your economic system are all a process of isolation, and they therefore bring contention. You must, if you are at all serious or earnest in this, dissolve this centre completely, and not justify it. That is why we must understand the process of experience. Identification is still the process of the self. The larger is simply the projection of the me, which I experience and which therefore strengthens the me. All the various forms of discipline, belief, and knowledge surely only strengthen the self. People are intelligent in different ways, but we are not integrally intelligent. To be integrally intelligent means to be without the self. The moment I say, I want to dissolve this, in that there is still the experiencing of the self, and so the self is strengthened. Creation is when the self is not there, because creation is not intellectual, is not of the mind, is not self-projected, is something beyond all experiencing. Any movement of the mind, positive or negative, is an experience which actually strengthens the me. When you believe that there is truth, God, the timeless state, immortality, is that not the process of strengthening the self? The self has projected that thing which you feel and believe will come and destroy the self. So, having projected this idea of continuance in a timeless state as a spiritual entity, you have an experience, and such experience only strengthens the self. You have not really destroyed the self, but only given it a different name, a different quality. The self is still there because you have experienced it. Thus, our action from the beginning to the end is the same action, only we think it is evolving, growing. If you observe inwardly, it is the same action going on, the same me functioning at different levels with different labels, different names. When you see the whole process, the cunning, extraordinary inventions, the intelligence of the self, how it covers itself up through identification, through virtue, through experience, through belief, through knowledge, when you see that the mind is moving in a circle, in a cage of its own making, not ideologically, verbally, not through projected experiencing, but when you are actually in that state, then you will see that the mind, being utterly still, has no power of creating. Whatever the mind creates is in a circle within the field of the self. When the mind is non-creating, there is creation, which is not a recognizable process. Reality, truth, is not to be recognized, or truth to come, belief, knowledge, experiencing, the pursuit of virtue, all this must go. That is why it is so important to be poor, not only in the things of the world, but also in belief and in knowledge. If you and I, as individuals, can see this whole working of the self, then we shall know what love is. When there is love, self is not. Fear can exist only in relation to something, not in isolation. I can be afraid only of what I know. When I say I am afraid of death, am I really afraid of the unknown, which is death, or am I afraid of losing what I have known? My fear is not of death, but of losing my association with things belonging to me. The fear of losing my family, my reputation, my character, my bank account, my appetites, and so on. I am afraid of the known, which means I am afraid of losing people, things, or ideas. I am afraid of discovering what I am, afraid of being at a loss, afraid of the pain which might come into being when I have lost or have not gained or have no more pleasure. There is fear of pain. Physical pain is a nervous response, but psychological pain arises when I hold on to things that give me satisfaction, for then I am afraid of anyone or anything that may take them away from me. The psychological accumulations prevent psychological pain, as long as they are undisturbed. That is, I am a bundle of accumulations, experiences, which prevent any serious form of disturbance, and I do not want to be disturbed. Therefore, I am afraid of anyone who disturbs them. Thus, my fear is of the known. Knowledge also helps to prevent pain. That is why I am afraid of losing my beliefs, though I have no perfect knowledge or concrete proof of the reality of such beliefs. Fear exists so long as there is accumulation of the known, which creates the fear of losing. Therefore, fear of the unknown is really fear of losing the accumulated known. Though my intention in accumulating is to ward off pain, pain is inherent in the process of accumulation. The very things which I have create fear, which is pain. The seed of defense brings offense. I want physical security. Thus I create a sovereign government, which necessitates armed forces, which means war, which destroys security. When I see the fallacy of demanding security, I do not accumulate any more. If you said that you see it, but you cannot help accumulating, it is because you do not really see that, inherently. In accumulation there is pain. Fear comes into being when I desire to be in a particular pattern. To live without fear means to live without a particular pattern. Any action on my part based on the desire to break the frame will only create another pattern, and therefore fear. I must not act. I must make no movement to break the frame. I see that the mind itself is the frame, the pattern. It lives in the habitual pattern which it has created for itself. Therefore, the mind itself is fear. Whatever the mind does goes towards strengthening an old pattern or furthering a new one. This means that whatever the mind does to get rid of fear causes fear. Identification is a process of self-forgetfulness. If I can identify myself with something greater, with something worthwhile, with beauty, with life, with truth, with belief, with knowledge, at least temporarily, there is an escape from the me. Fear is the non-acceptance of what is. There is understanding and freedom from the self only when I can look at it completely and integrally as a whole, and I can do that only when I understand the whole process of all activity born of desire, which is the very expression of thought, for thought is not different from desire. without justifying it, without condemning it, without suppressing it. If I can understand that, then I shall know if there is the possibility of going beyond the restrictions of the self. Life is becoming more and more complex. In order to escape from that, we try to renounce or be detached from things, from cars, from houses, from organisations, from cinemas, and from the innumerable circumstances outwardly thrust upon us. We think we shall be simple by withdrawing. Simplicity, which is fundamental, real, can only come into being inwardly, and from that there is an outward expression. That simplicity makes one more and more sensitive. A sensitive mind, a sensitive heart, is essential, for then it is capable of quick perception, quick reception. Inwardly, we are prisoners to our desires, to our wants, to our ideals, to innumerable motivations. Simplicity cannot be found unless one is free inwardly. Therefore, it must begin inwardly, not outwardly. There is an extraordinary freedom when one understands the whole process of belief, why the mind is attached to a belief. When there is freedom from beliefs, there is simplicity, but that simplicity requires intelligence, and to be intelligent, one must be aware of one's impediments. To be aware, one must be constantly on the watch, not established in any particular groove, in any particular pattern of thought or action. The outward expression is only an indication of our inward state, but to understand the inward state, one must approach through the outer. As we proceed to investigate the inward complexities of our being, we become more and more sensitive, free. It is this inward simplicity that is so essential, because that simplicity creates sensitivity. A mind that is not sensitive, not alert, not aware, is incapable of any receptivity, any creative action. Conformity as a means of making ourselves simple really makes the mind and heart dull, insensitive. The more you understand the process of sublimation, suppression, substitution, the greater the possibility of being simple. Our minds are so crowded with an infinite knowledge of facts, of what others have said, that we have become incapable of being simple and having direct experience ourselves. These problems demand a new approach, and they can be approached only when we are simple, inwardly really simple. That simplicity comes only through self-knowledge, through understanding ourselves, the ways of our thinking and feeling, the movements of our thoughts, our responses, how we conform through fear to a public opinion, to what others say. Without being simple, one cannot be sensitive to all the things which are going on about us in the world. If one is not simple, one cannot be sensitive to the inward intimation of things. Most of us live so superficially on the upper level of our consciousness. There we try to be thoughtful or intelligent. There we try to make our minds simple through compulsion, through discipline. When we force the upper mind to be simple, such compulsion only hardens the mind, does not make the mind supple, clear, quick. To be simple in the whole, total process of our consciousness is extremely arduous, because there must be no inward reservation. There must be an eagerness to find out, to inquire into the process of our being, which means to be awake to every intimation, to every hint, to be aware of our fears, of our hopes, and to investigate, and to be free of them more and more and more. Only then, when the mind and the heart are really simple, not encrusted, are we able to solve the many problems that confront us. One must have the capacity to investigate all these things anew, because it is only through direct experience that our problems are solved. And to have direct experience there must be simplicity, which means there must be sensitivity. A mind is made dull by the weight of knowledge, by the past, by the future. Only a mind that is capable of adjusting itself to the present continually, from moment to moment, can meet the powerful influences and pressures constantly put upon us by our environment. Such a mind is capable of extraordinary receptivity, because there is no barrier, there is no fear, there is no going towards something. Therefore it is capable of receiving grace, God, truth, or what you will. But a mind that is pursuing reality is not a simple mind. A mind that is seeking out, searching, groping, agitated, is not a simple mind. Happiness is not an end, it is the result of reality. When the mind and the heart have become simple and therefore sensitive, not through any form of compulsion, direction, or imposition, however complex our problems, we shall be able to approach them freshly and see them differently. It is only when one has humility, not a cultivated humility, that one is able to meet the things of life that are so pressing, because then one is not important. One doesn't look through one's own pressures and sense of importance. One looks at the problem for itself, and then one is able to solve it. To know ourselves means to know our relationship with the world, not only with the world of ideas and people, but also with nature, with the things we possess. Watch yourself without identification, without any comparison, without any condemnation. Just watch, and you will see an extraordinary thing taking place. You not only put an end to an activity which is unconscious, because most of our activities are unconscious. Further, you are aware of the motives of that action, without inquiry, without digging into it. When you are aware, you see the whole process of your thinking and action, but it can happen only when there is no condemnation. When I condemn something, I do not understand it. Just be aware, without any sense of justification, which may appear rather negative, but it is not negative. It has the quality of passivity, which is direct action, and you will discover this if you experiment with it. You cannot keep on thinking about it, speculating about it, or questioning it. You have to be sensitive enough to receive the content of it. In that process, we begin to understand ourselves, not only the superficial layers of our consciousness, but the deeper, which is much more important because there are all our motives or intentions, our hidden, confused demands, anxieties, fears, appetites. Outwardly, we may have them all under control, but inwardly they are boiling. Until those have been completely understood through awareness, obviously there cannot be freedom, there cannot be happiness, there is no intelligence. That intelligence cannot be derived from or cultivated through specialization. It comes into being only when we are passively aware of the whole process of our consciousness, which is to be aware of ourselves without choice, without choosing what is right or what is wrong. When you are passively aware, you will see that out of that passivity, which is not idleness, which is not sleep, but extreme alertness, the problem has quite a different significance, which means there is no longer identification with the problem, and therefore there is no judgment, and hence the problem begins to reveal its content. If you are able to do that constantly, continuously, then every problem can be solved fundamentally, not superficially. The problem is always a problem of relationship with things, with people, or with ideas. There is no other problem. And to meet the problem of relationship, with its constantly varying demands, to meet it rightly, to meet it adequately, one has to be aware passively. This passivity is not a question of determination, of will, of discipline. To be aware that we are not passive is the very beginning. Then, as we begin to know ourselves in relationship to the problem, how we respond, what are the various prejudices, demands, pursuits in meeting that problem, this awareness will reveal the process of our own thinking, of our own inward nature, and in that there is a release. The chooser is in confusion, therefore he chooses. The man who is clear and simple does not choose. What is, is. Action based on an idea is obviously the act of choice, and such action is not liberating. On the contrary, it only creates further resistance, further conflict, according to that conditioned thinking. The important thing, therefore, is to be aware from moment to moment, without accumulating the experience which awareness brings, because the moment you accumulate, you are aware only according to that accumulation, according to that pattern, according to that experience, and therefore there is no longer observation, but merely translation. When there is translation, there is choice, and choice creates conflict. In conflict there can be no understanding. This passive awareness does not come through any form of discipline, through any practice. It is to be just aware, from moment to moment, of our thinking and feeling, not only when we are awake, for we shall see, as we go into it more deeply, that we begin to dream, that we begin to throw up all kinds of symbols, which we translate as dreams. Thus we open the door into the hidden, which becomes the known. But to find the unknown, we must go beyond the door. Desire is sensation with the object of its attainment, a symbol, maybe a picture, a person, a word, a name, an idea which gives me a sensation, which makes me feel that I like or dislike it. If the sensation is pleasurable, I want to attain it, to possess, to hold on to its symbol, and continue in that pleasure. From time to time, according to my inclinations and intensities, I change the picture, the image, the object. With one form of pleasure, I am fed up, tired, bored, so I seek a new sensation, a new idea, a new symbol. I reject the old sensation and take on a new one, with new words, new significances, new experiences. I resist the old and yield to the new, which I consider to be higher, nobler, more satisfying. There is perception, sensation, contact, and desire, and the mind becomes the mechanical instrument of this process, in which symbols, words, objects are the centre, round which all desire, all pursuits, all ambitions are built. That centre is the me. The more I am frustrated, the more strength I give to the me. So long as there is hoping, longing, there is always the background of fear, which again strengthens the centre. And revolution is possible only at that centre, not on the surface, which is merely a process of distraction, a superficial change leading to mischievous action. My mind is the mechanical instrument of sensation, of memory, a dead centre from which I act, I think. The objects I pursue are the projections of the mind as symbols, from which it derives sensations. The mind becomes merely an instrument of sensation and memory, and in that process we are caught. So long as the mind is seeking further experience, it can only think in terms of sensation, and any experience that may be spontaneous, creative, vital, strikingly new, it immediately reduces to sensation, and pursues that sensation, which then becomes a memory. Therefore, the experience is dead, and the mind becomes merely a stagnant pool of the past. In myself I see this process of desire going on, which is mechanical, repetitive, which holds the mind in a process of routine, and makes of it a dead centre of the past in which there is no creative spontaneity. Also, there are sudden moments of creation, of that which is not of the mind, which is not of memory, which is not of sensation or of desire. The mind cannot experience anything new, because its approach is always through memory, through recognition, and that which is recognized through memory is not truth, creation, or reality. It can only experience sensation, and creation is not sensation. If something that is everlastingly new, if it is something that is everlastingly new from moment to moment. If you will understand without being mesmerized by words, by habits, by ideas, and see how important it is to have the new constantly impinging on the mind, then perhaps you will understand the process of desire, the routine, the boredom, the constant craving for experience. Then I think you will begin to see that desire has very little significance in life for a man who is really seeking. Obviously there are certain physical needs, food, clothing, shelter, and all the rest of it, but they never become psychological appetites, things on which the mind builds itself as a centre of desire. Beyond the physical needs, any form of desire, for greatness, for truth, for virtue, becomes a psychological process by which the mind builds the idea of the me, and strengthens itself at the centre. When you see this process, when you are really aware of it without opposition, without a sense of temptation, without resistance, without justifying or judging it, then one will discover that the mind is capable of receiving the new, and that the new is never a sensation. Therefore it can never be recognized, re-experienced. It is a state of being in which creativeness comes without invitation, without memory, and that is reality. Life is relationship, which is expressed through contact with things, with people, and with ideas. In understanding relationship, we shall have capacity to meet life fully, adequately. You exist because you are related, and it is the lack of understanding of relationship that causes conflict. Now there is no understanding of relationship because we use relationship merely as a means of furthering achievement, furthering transformation, furthering becoming. But Relationship is a means of self-discovery because relationship is to be. It is existence. Relationship is a mirror in which I can see myself. That mirror can either be distorted or it can be as is, reflecting that which is. But most of us see in relationship, in that mirror, things we would rather see. We do not see what is. We would rather idealize, escape. We would rather live in the future than understand that relationship in the immediate present. We are related to someone only so long as that relationship gratifies us, so long as it gives us a refuge, so long as it satisfies us. If you really examine your life very closely, you will see it as a fact, and to avoid a fact is to live in ignorance, which can never produce right relationship. It is a process of building resistance against another, a wall over which we look and observe the other, but we always retain the wall and remain behind it, whether it be a psychological wall, a material wall, an economic wall, or a national wall. So long as we live in isolation behind a wall, there is no relationship with another, and we live enclosed because it is much more gratifying. We think it is much more secure. Still clinging to your own limitations, you think you can create world unity, world peace, which is impossible. The process of isolation is a process of the search for power, whether one is seeking power individually, or for a racial or national group, there must be isolation, because the very desire for power, for position, is separatism. What happens when you build a wall against something? That something is constantly beating against your wall. The very resistance indicates that you are in conflict with the other. Identification with something greater, the party, the country, the race, the religion, God, is the search for power, because you in yourself are empty, dull, weak. You like to identify yourself with something greater. What is important is to understand oneself in relationship with another. Then relationship becomes not a process of isolation, but a movement in which you discover your own motives, your own thoughts, your own pursuits, and that very discovery is the beginning of liberation, the beginning of transformation. So long as I am experiencing, so long as I am becoming, there must be this dualistic action. There must be the thinker and the thought, two separate processes at work. There is no integration. There is always a centre which is operating through the will of action, to be or not to be. Collectively, individually, nationally, and so on. The effort of the thinker is to become more or become less. In becoming, there is always the deteriorating factor. We are pursuing a false process. In that process of effort, he pursues the false illusion that there are two separate processes, whereas there is only one process. Therein lies the fundamental factor of deterioration. It is that process which is creative, in which there is no sense of I dominating, becoming, positively or negatively, what is important to see is that the maker of effort and the object towards which he is making effort are the same. That requires enormously great understanding, watchfulness, to see how the mind divides itself into the high and the low, the high being the security, the permanent entity, but still remaining a process of thought, and therefore of time. If we can understand this as direct experience, then you will see that quite a different factor comes into being. Thinking has not solved our problems. The philosophers, the scholars, the political leaders have not really solved any of our human problems, which are the relationship between you and another, between you and myself. Can the mind, which has created the problems, resolve those things that it has itself brought forth? So long as that thought process, that self which creates the problem, is not understood and put an end to, we are bound to have conflict, within and without, in thought, in emotion, in action. No solution of any kind, however clever, however well thought out, can ever put an end to the conflict between man and man, between you and me. Realizing this, being aware of how thought springs up and from what source, then we ask, can thought ever come to an end? Thought cannot see the completeness of the problem. It can only see partially, and a partial answer is not a complete answer. Therefore, it is not a solution. Obviously, it can be solved only when we can look at it as a whole, not in compartments, not divided. It is only possible when the process of thinking, which has its source in the me, the self, in the background of tradition, of conditioning, of prejudice, of hope, of despair, has come to an end. Not seeking to dissolve the self in order to achieve a result, but seeing the activity of the self, the me, constantly in action. If in each one of us, the centre of the me is non-existent, with its desire for power, position, authority, continuance, self-preservation, surely our problems will come to an end. There must be an awareness which is not of thought. To be aware without condemnation or justification of the activities of the self, just to be aware, is sufficient. If you are aware in order to find out how to resolve the problem, in order to transform it, in order to produce a result, then it is still within the field of the self, of the me. So long as the mind is seeking to be in a state of non-greed, surely it is still greedy, is it not? Similarly, so long as the mind wishes, desires, and practices in order to be in a state in which there is love, surely it denies that state. Seeing this problem, this complex problem of living, and being aware of the process of our own thinking, and realizing that it actually leads nowhere, when we deeply realize that, then surely there is a state of intelligence, which is not individual or collective. Then the problem of the relationship of the individual to society, of the individual to the community, of the individual to reality, ceases. It is his intelligence alone, I feel, that can solve our immense problems. That cannot be a result. It comes into being only when we understand the total process of thinking, not only at the conscious level, but also at the deeper, hidden levels of consciousness. To understand any of these problems, we have to have a very quiet mind, a very still mind, so that the mind can look at the problem without interposing ideas or theories, without any distraction. Thought, when you have a problem, becomes a distraction, thought being an idea, an opinion, judgment, comparison, which prevents us from looking and thereby understanding and resolving the problem. A mind that is very quiet, a mind that is not distracted by its own thought, a mind that is open, can look at the problem very directly and very simply. And it is this capacity to look without any distraction at our problems that is the only solution. It comes into being through no form of discipline or compulsion or sublimation, without any effort of the me, of thought. In that state of tranquility of a mind that is really still there is love. We have to find out what the mind that we use in our everyday life, and also the mind of which most of us are unconscious, does in relation to our problems. We must look at the mind as it is, and not as it should be. When you observe your own thinking, you will see it is an isolated, fragmentary process. You are thinking according to your reactions, the reactions of your memory, of your experience, of your knowledge, of your belief. If I say that there must be a fundamental revolution, you immediately react. You will object to that word, revolution. If you have got good investments, spiritual or otherwise. So your reaction is dependent on your knowledge, on your belief, on your experience. All these give security, do they not? They give security, give strength to the process of thinking. That process only strengthens the me, the mind, the self, whether you call that self high or low. All our religions, all our social sanctions, all our laws are for the support of the individual self, the separative action, and in opposition to that there is the totalitarian state. If you go deeper into the unconscious, there too is the same process that is at work. There we are the collective, influenced by the environment, by the climate, by the society, by the father and the mother, the grandfather. There again is the desire to assert, to dominate as an individual, as the me. The function of the mind is to be separated, otherwise your mind is not there. Having cultivated this process for centuries, we find we cannot cooperate. We can only be urged, compelled, driven by authority, fear, either economic or religious. If that is the actual state, not only consciously, but also at the deeper levels, in our motives, our intentions, our pursuits, how can there be cooperation? How can there be intelligent coming together to do something? As that is almost impossible, religions and organized social parties force the individual. Until we understand how to transcend this separative thinking, this process of giving emphasis to the me and the mine, whether in the collective form or the individual form, we shall not have peace. We shall have constant conflict and wars. When I think along these lines, I must discipline, I must think more properly, I must be this or that. Thought is compelling itself, urging itself, disciplining itself to be something or not to be something, a process of isolation. Please examine the disciplining process, which is solely a thought process, in which there is subjection, repression, control, domination, all affecting the unconscious, which asserts itself later as you grow older, when you realize that fundamentally or deeply that thought cannot end itself. You understand that any reaction is conditioned and that, through conditioning, there can be no freedom, either at the beginning or at the end, and freedom is always at the beginning. Surely, if you see all that, there is already a different process at work. The intellect, with all its ramifications, with all its desires, ambitions, pursuits, must come to an end for love to come into existence. You are not thinking of yourself. That is the highest form of intelligence. When your vested interests are there can be no love. There is only the process of exploitation, born of fear. It is only when we know how to love each other that there can be cooperation, that there can be intelligent functioning, a coming together over any question. Only then is it possible to find out what God is, what truth is. We should, if I may suggest it, not merely listen to the speaker, but follow the problem as we know it in our daily life. First, you must purge your mind completely of every factor that is in the way, every hope, every desire to continue, every desire to find out what is on the other side, because the mind is constantly seeking security. It has the desire to continue, and hopes for a means of fulfillment, for a future existence. Such a mind is incapable of discovering that truth. What is important is the approach to the problem. With what motivation, with what urge, with what desire you come to it. The fundamental factor of self-deception is this constant desire to be something, in this world and in the world hereafter. So we begin to deceive ourselves the moment there is the urge to be, to become, or to achieve. One of the basic problems of our life. Is it possible to live in this world and be nothing? Then only is there freedom from all deception, because then only is the mind not seeking a result. The mind is not seeking a satisfactory answer. The mind is not seeking any form of justification. The mind is not seeking security in any form, in any relationship. That takes place only when the mind realizes the possibilities and subtleties of deception, and therefore, with understanding, abandons every form of justification, security, which means the mind is capable then of being completely nothing. There can be cooperation only when you and I have no common aim created by thought. Cooperation is only possible when you and I do not desire to be anything. You and I agree to do a certain piece of work intellectually, but unconsciously, deeply, you and I are at battle. Unconsciously and deeply, you have your beliefs and I have mine. By talking about brotherhood, we have not solved the whole problem of beliefs, but have only theoretically and intellectually agreed. Experience becomes a dividing factor in our human relationship. Experience is a way of deception. If I have experienced something, I cling to it. I do not go into the whole problem of the process of experiencing, but because I have experienced, that is sufficient, and I cling to it. Each of us is so identified with a particular belief, with a particular form or method of bringing about happiness, economic adjustment, that our mind is captured by that, and we are incapable of going deeper into the problem, until we dissolve them through understanding, not only at the superficial level, But at the deeper level also, there can be no peace in the world. Such things come when the mind does not seek, when the mind is completely quiet, no longer creating movements and beliefs upon which it can depend, or from which it derives a certain strength, which is an indication of self-deception. It is only when the mind understands this whole process of desire that it can be still. Only then is the mind not in movement to be or not to be. Then only is there the possibility of a state in which there is no deception. To understand what this self-activity is, one must obviously examine it, look at it, be aware of the entire process. If one can be aware of it, then there is the possibility of dissolution. But to be aware of it requires a certain understanding, a certain intention to face the thing as it is, and not to interpret, not to modify, not to condemn it. In order to understand something, we must be capable of looking at it, and to look at it we must know its various activities at different levels, conscious as well as unconscious. The conscious directives and also the self-centered movements of our unconscious motives and intentions. A man who pursues virtue consciously is unvirtuous. Humility cannot be pursued, and that is the beauty of humility. The self-centered activity of the me is a time process. It is memory that gives continuity to the activity of the center, which is the me. If you watch yourself and are aware of this center of activity, you will see that it is only the process of time, of memory, of experiencing and translating every experience according to a memory. Is it possible for the mind ever to be completely free from self-centered activity? That is a very important question to put to ourselves, because in the very putting of it, you will find the answer. Is it possible not to think in terms of time, not to think in terms of what I shall be, what I have been, what I am? For from such thought, the whole process of self-centered activity begins. There also begins the determination to become, the determination to choose and to avoid, which are all processes of time. We see in that process infinite mischief, misery, confusion, distortion, deterioration. It is only when you have complete cessation of the time process, of the activity of the self, it is only with revolution, not through evolution, not through the me becoming, but through the me completely coming to an end, that there is the new. The time process cannot bring the new. Time is not the way of creation. Our question surely is it possible for the mind to be in that state without regard to time? Surely that is an important discovery to be made by each one of us, because that is the door to love. All of the doors are activities of the self. The moment we are conscious that we love, self-activity has come into being, therefore it ceases to be love. The total process of the mind is to be understood only through relationship with nature, with people, with our own projections, with everything about us. Life is nothing but relationship, being aware of the whole process of time as consciousness, without any choice, without any determined, purposive intention, without the desire for any result. You will see that the process of time comes to an end voluntarily, not induced, not as a result of desire. It is only when that process comes to an end that love is, which is eternally new. Truth is not something far away. It is the truth about the mind, truth about its activities from moment to moment. If we are aware of this moment-to-moment truth, of this whole process of time, that awareness releases consciousness for the energy, which is intelligence, love. Our minds are the product of many yesterdays, and the present is merely the passage of the past to the future. Our minds, our activities, our being, are founded on time. Without time we cannot think, because thought is the result of time. Thought is the product of many yesterdays, and there is no thought without memory. Memory is time, for there are two kinds of time, the chronological and the psychological. There is time as yesterday by the watch, and as yesterday by memory. You cannot reject chronological time. It would be absurd. You would miss your train. But is there really any time at all apart from chronological time? Psychological time is the product of the mind. Without the foundation of thought, there is no time, time merely being memory, as yesterday in conjunction with today, which moulds tomorrow. When you have ecstasy, a creative joy, a series of bright clouds surrounded by dark clouds, in that moment there is no time, there is only the immediate present. The mind, coming in after that, the experience in the present, remembers and wishes to continue it, gathering more and more of itself, thereby creating time. Time is considered as a means of evolving something greater, of becoming something. The problem is this: one is violent, greedy, envious, angry, vicious, or passionate. What we are dissatisfies us. It creates conflict, disturbance, and, disliking that state, we want something better, something nobler, more idealistic. Therefore, we desire transformation, because there is pain, discomfort, conflict. If you say it will be overcome by time, you are still in conflict. You may say it will take 20 days or 20 years to get rid of conflict, to change what you are, but during that time you are still in conflict, and therefore time does not bring about transformation. When we use time as a means of acquiring a quality, a virtue, or a state of being, we are merely postponing or avoiding what is. The very resistance to conflict is itself a form of conflict, in the form of what you call greed, envy, or violence, but your mind is still in conflict. So it is important to see the falseness of the process of depending on time as a means of overcoming. Then you are able to do what you are, a psychological disturbance. If I really want to understand something, there is immediately a quiet state of mind. When you want to understand conflict, you are no longer depending on time at all. You are simply confronted with what is, which is conflict. Then, immediately there comes a quietness, a stillness of mind. When you no longer depend on time as a means of transforming what is, because you see the falseness of that process, then you are confronted with what is. And as you are interested to understand what is, naturally you have a quiet mind. In that alert yet passive state of mind, there is understanding. When the mind is no longer resisting, no longer avoiding, no longer discarding or blaming what is, but is simply passively aware, then, in that passivity of the mind, you will find, if you really go into the problem, that there comes a transformation. If you will experiment with what I have been saying, you will find that there is immediate regeneration, a newness, a quality of freshness, because the mind is always still when it is interested, when it desires or has the intention to understand. We are afraid that, if we understand, it might bring about a revolutionary action in our life, and therefore we resist. When the mind is still, tranquil, not seeking any answer or any solution, neither resisting nor avoiding, it is only then that there can be a regeneration. It is truth that liberates, not your effort to be free. If we are to discuss the question of a fundamental change in ourselves, and therefore in the world, and in this change to awaken a certain vision, an enthusiasm, a zeal, a faith, a hope, a certainty which will give us the necessary impetus for action, if we are to understand that, isn't it necessary to go into this question of consciousness? We can see what we mean by consciousness at the superficial level of the mind. Obviously, it is the thinking process, thought. Thought is the result of memory, verbalization. It is the naming, recording, and storing up of certain experiences, so as to be able to communicate. At this level there are also various inhibitions, controls, sanctions, disciplines. With all this we are quite familiar. When we go a little deeper, there are all the accumulations of the race, the hidden motives, the collective and personal ambitions, prejudices, which are the result of perception, contact, and desire. This total consciousness, the hidden as well as the open, is centered around the idea of the me, the self. One must first see the extraordinary subtle activities of the me, of the mind. One must become aware of the ideas, beliefs, speculations, and put them all aside, for they are really deceptions. Others may have experienced reality, but if you have not experienced it, What is the good of speculating about it, or imagining that you are in essence something real, immortal, godly? That is still within the field of thought, and anything that springs from thought is conditioned, is of time, of memory, therefore it is not real. Perhaps, in coming to this point, we have used the conscious mind. To go further and experience more deeply requires a mind that is quiet and alert to find out, does it not? It is no longer pursuing ideas, because if you pursue an idea, there is the thinker following what is being said, and so you immediately create duality. Surely it is only when the mind is quiet that it can understand the enormous difficulty, the complex implications of the thinker and the thought as two separate processes, the experiencer and the experienced, the observer and the observed. Revolution, this psychological creative revolution, in which the me is not, comes only when the thinker and the thought are one, when there is no duality such as the thinker controlling the thought, and I suggest it is this experience alone that releases the creative energy which in turn brings about a fundamental revolution, the breaking up of the psychological me. When we realize that disciplines, beliefs, ideals only strengthen the me, and are therefore utterly futile, when we are aware of that from day to day, see the truth of it, do we not come to the central point when the thinker is constantly separating himself from his thoughts, from his observations, from his experiences? So long as the me is the observer, the one who gathers experience, strengthens himself through experience, there can be no radical change, no creative release. When the mind realizes that any speculation, any verbalization, any form of thought only gives strength to the me, when it sees that as long as the thinker exists apart from thought there must be limitation, then the conflict of duality, when the mind realizes that, then it is watchful, everlastingly aware of how it is separating itself from experience, asserting itself, seeking power. In that awareness, if the mind pursues it ever more deeply and extensively, without seeking an end, a goal, there comes a state in which the thinker and the thought are one. In that state there is no effort, there is no becoming, there is no desire to change. In that state the me is not, or there is a transformation which is not of the mind. It is only when the mind is empty that there is a possibility of creation. I am talking of the emptiness which comes through extraordinary thoughtfulness, when the mind sees its own power of creating illusion and goes beyond. Is it possible for the mind to put aside completely all the reasonings, the experiences, the impositions, authorities, so that it is in a state of emptiness? If I may suggest, listen to it, let the question be put to you, let the seed be sown, and it will bear fruit if you really listen to it, if you do not resist it. When the mind sees its own activities, is aware of its own desires, demands, urges, pursuits, the creation of its own authorities, fears, when it sees in itself the resistance created by discipline, by control, and the hope which projects beliefs, ideals, when the mind sees through, is aware of this whole process, can it put aside all these things and be new, creatively empty? You will find whether it can or cannot, only if you experiment without having an opinion about it, without wanting to experience that creative state. If you want to experience it, you will, but what you experience is only a projection of desire. But if you begin to observe, to be aware of your own activities from day to day, from moment to moment, watching the whole process of yourself as in a mirror, then, as you go deeper and deeper, you will come to the ultimate question of this emptiness, in which alone there can be the new. There is reality only when the mind is completely free from the analyzer, from the experiencer and the experienced. Then you will find the answer. Then you will see that the change comes without your asking, that the state of creative emptiness is not a thing to be cultivated. It is there. It comes darkly, without any invitation. Only in that state is there a possibility of renewal, newness, revolution. I am suffering because I am lost. I am being called to give my attention to something which I am not willing to look at. Something is being forced upon me which I am reluctant to see and to understand. When sorrow exists, it exists only in relation to something. It cannot exist by itself, even as fear cannot exist by itself, but only in relation to something, to an individual, to an incident, to a feeling. Now you are fully aware of the suffering. If the centre is related to it, then it is afraid of it. Then it must act and do something about it. But if the centre is that, a fundamental transformation has taken place. Then there is no longer I suffer, because there is no centre to suffer, and the centre suffers because we have never examined what the centre is. We just live from word to word, from reaction to reaction. We never say, let me see that that thing is that suffers. You cannot see by enforcement, by discipline. You must look with interest, with spontaneous comprehension. Then you will see that the thing we call suffering, pain, the thing that we avoid, and the discipline have all gone. As long as I have no relationship to the thing as outside me, the problem is not. The moment I establish a relationship with it outside me, the problem is. Then there is full attention, integrated attention, and that which is completely regarded is understood and dissolved, and so there is no fear, and therefore the word sorrow is non-existent. We can find out inwardly, psychologically, why we are in this state of utter boredom. We can see why most of us are in this state. We have gone from sensation to sensation, from excitement to excitement, till we come to a point when we are really exhausted. Now, realizing that, don't proceed any further. Take a rest. Be quiet. Let the mind gather strength by itself. Don't force it. As the soil renews itself during the winter time, so, when the mind is allowed to be quiet, it renews itself. When you come to that point where you are really allowing yourself to be as you are, bored, ugly, hideous, or whatever it is, then there is a possibility of dealing with it. There is a problem only when we do not accept a thing as it is, and wish to transform it, which does not mean that I am advocating contentment. On the contrary, if we accept what we are, then we see that the thing which we dreaded, the thing which we called boredom, the thing which we called despair, the thing which we called fear, has undergone a complete change. There is a complete transformation of the thing of which we were afraid. To say to oneself, I understand something intellectually, is surely a barrier to understanding. It is a partial process, and therefore no understanding at all. The thing that I am objecting to is the disturbance. I give it different names at different times, in different moods. One day I call it this, and another something else. But the desire is basically not to be disturbed. I don't want to be free from pleasure because there is no disturbance, at least not for the time being. But hate, resentment are very disturbing factors in my life, and I want to get rid of them. If I am not disturbed, I shall remain asleep, and perhaps that is what most of us want to do. To be pacified, to be put to sleep, to get away from any disturbance, to find isolation, seclusion, security. If I do not mind being disturbed, really, not just superficially, if I don't mind being disturbed because I want to find out, then my attitude towards hate, towards resentment, undergoes a change, doesn't it? If I do not mind being disturbed, then the name is not important, is it? The word hate is not important, is it? Or resentment against people is not important, is it? Because then I am directly experiencing the state, which I call resentment, without verbalizing that experience. Because we term it, we reduce a new experience or fix it in the terms of the old, whereas if we do not name it, then there is an experience which is directly understood, and this understanding brings about a transformation in that experiencing. We do not see the importance of being disturbed, of being inwardly insecure, of not being dependent. Surely it is only an insecurity that you discover, that you see, that you understand. Any attempt to find security is a hindrance to understanding. When we want to get rid of something which is disturbing, it is surely a hindrance. If we can experience a feeling directly, without naming it, I think we shall find a great deal in it. Then there is no longer a battle with it, because the experiencer and the thing experienced are one, and that is essential. What brings about the unfoldment of the self so that you begin to understand it is the constant awareness of it, without any condemnation, without any identification. There must be a certain spontaneity. You cannot be constantly analysing it, disciplining it, shaping it. This spontaneity is essential to understanding. If I merely limit, control, condemn, then I put a stop to the movement of thought and feeling. It is in the movement of thought and feeling that I discover. Then it is important to find out how to act about it. If I act according to an idea, according to a standard, according to an ideal, then I force the self into a particular pattern. In that there is no understanding, there is no transcending. If I can watch the self without any condemnation, without any identification, then it is possible to go beyond it. If you are listening to me and trying to follow, with not too great an effort, what I wish to convey, then there is a possibility of our understanding each other. But if you are all the time criticizing, throwing up your opinions, what you have learned from books, what somebody else has told you, and so on, then you and I are not related, because this screen is between us. If we are both trying to find out the issues of the problem, which lie in the problem itself, if both of us are eager to go to the bottom of it, find the truth of it, discover what it is, then we are related. Then your mind is both alert and passive, watching to see what is true in this. Understanding comes, surely, when there is the swift pliability of a mind, which is passively aware. Then it is capable of reception. Then it is sensitive. A mind is not sensitive when it is crowded with ideas, prejudices, opinions, either for or against. To understand relationship, there must be a passive awareness, which does not destroy relationship. On the contrary, it makes relationship much more vital, much more significant. Then there is in that relationship a possibility of real affection. There is a warmth, a sense of nearness, which is not mere sentiment or sensation. If we can so approach or be in that relationship to everything, then our problems will be easily solved. We are empty shells if we do not possess, if we do not fill our life with furniture, with music, with knowledge. When there is a disruption, a breaking away of that, then there is sorrow, because then you suddenly discover yourself as you are, an empty shell without much meaning. To be aware of the whole content of relationship is action, and from that action there is a possibility of true relationship, a possibility of discovering its great depth, its great significance, and of knowing what love is. The man who is experiencing reality from moment to moment has no means of communicating that reality. Neither the believer nor the non-believer will find God, because reality is the unknown, and your belief or non-belief in the unknown is merely a self-projection, and therefore not real. Actually, your belief has very little significance, because you believe and exploit, you believe and kill. The rich man also believes in God. He exploits ruthlessly, accumulates money. Reality is what you are, what you do, what you think, and your belief in God is merely an escape from your monotonous, stupid, cruel life. Furthermore, belief invariably divides people. You may bring a few people together in a group, but that group is opposed to another group. Ideas and beliefs are never unifying. On the contrary, they are separative, disintegrating, and destructive. Therefore, your belief in God is really spreading misery in the world, though it may have brought you momentary consolation. In actuality, it has brought you more misery and destruction in the form of wars, famines, class divisions, and the ruthless action of separate individuals. So, your belief has no validity at all. To know that which is immeasurable, which is not of time, the mind must be free of time, which means the mind must be free from all thought, from all ideas about God. All that you know are words, the experiences of others, or some moments of rather vague experience. To know what is beyond time, the process of time must be understood, time being thought, the process of becoming, the accumulation of knowledge. The mind must be free of the known, which means the mind must be completely silent, not made silent. You may succeed for a period of time in forcing the mind to be superficially silent, but such a mind is not a still mind. Stillness comes only when you understand the whole process of thought, because to understand the process is to end it. And the ending of thought is the beginning of silence. Only when the mind is completely silent, not only on the upper level, but fundamentally right through it, on both the superficial and the deeper levels of consciousness, only then can the unknown come into being. The unknown is not something to be experienced by the mind. Silence alone can be experienced, nothing but silence. If the mind experiences anything but silence, it is merely projecting its own desires, and such a mind is not silent. When there is the silence which is not a product of effort, then only does the timeless, the eternal, come into being. That state is not a state of remembering. There is no entity that remembers, that experiences. It happens only in a state of freedom, spontaneity, not when the mind is disciplined according to a pattern. Virtue is facing the fact of what is, and the facing of the fact is a state of bliss. Only when the mind is blissful, quiet, without any movement of its own, without the projection of thought, conscious or unconscious, only then does the eternal come into being. There are two facets to memory, the psychological and the factual. They are always interrelated, therefore not clear-cut. Mind is memory, at whatever level, by whatever name you call it. Mind is the product of the past. It is founded on the past, which is memory, a conditioned state. Now, with that memory we meet life, we meet a new challenge. The challenge is always new, and our response is always old, because it is the outcome of the past. I absorb the new, I do not understand it, and the experiencing of the new is conditioned by the past. There is never complete understanding. It is only when there is complete understanding of anything that it does not leave the scar of memory. Our previous experiences are acting as a barrier to the understanding of the new challenge, so we go on cultivating and strengthening memory, and therefore we never understand the new. We never meet the challenge fully, completely. If you understand what has been said, see the truth of it. That truth is not a memory. Truth is ever new, constantly transforming itself. If you understand something completely, that is, see the truth of something wholly, you will find there is no memory whatsoever. Our education is the cultivation of memory, the strengthening of memory. Your religious practices and rituals, your reading and knowledge, are all strengthening of memory. We cannot live in the present because we are using the present as a passage to the future. Because I am going to become something, there is never a complete understanding of myself. And to understand myself, what I am exactly now, does not require the cultivation of memory. On the contrary, memory is a hindrance to the understanding of what is. If you had no memory, your property, your family, your ideas would not be important as such. So, to give strength to me and mine, you cultivate memory. If you observe, you will see that there is an interval between two thoughts, between two emotions. In that interval, which is not the product of memory, there is an extraordinary freedom from the me, and the mine, and the interval is timeless. Memory creates yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Memory of yesterday conditions today, and therefore shapes tomorrow. Memory is time, and through time we hope to achieve a result. If you see the truth of that through time the timeless cannot be understood or received, then we can go into the problem of memory. The memory of technical things is essential, but the psychological memory that maintains the self, the me, and the mind, that gives identification and self-continuance, is wholly detrimental to life and to reality. When one sees the truth of that, the force drops away. Therefore there is no psychological retention of yesterday's experience. Yesterday there was no memory, only a spontaneous appreciation, a direct response. Today you are desirous of recapturing the experience of yesterday. We go on, surrounding ourselves and our actions with memory, and therefore there is no newness, no freshness. That is why memory makes life weary, dull, and empty. We live in an antagonism with each other because the me and the mind are strengthened through memory. Memory as psychological retention is detrimental to the understanding of life, the communion with each other. Understanding comes into being when there are right values, when right values are established. For the right values to come into being, you must understand the thinker. If I don't know myself, then my action, my thought, has no foundation whatsoever. Therefore, self-knowledge is the beginning of meditation. Not the knowledge that you pick up from books, from authorities, from gurus, but the knowledge that comes into being through self-inquiry, which is self-awareness. The beginning of meditation is self-knowledge, which means being aware of every moment of thought and feeling, knowing all the layers of my consciousness, not only the superficial layers, but the hidden, deeply concealed activities. To know the deeply concealed activities, the hidden motives, responses, thoughts and feelings, there must be a tranquility in the conscious mind. That is, the conscious mind must be still in order to receive the projection of the unconscious. The superficial conscious mind is occupied with its daily activities, with earning a livelihood, deceiving others, exploiting others, running away from problems, all the daily activities of our existence. That superficial mind must understand the right significance for its own activities and thereby bring tranquility to itself. It cannot bring about tranquility, stillness by mere regimentation, by compulsion, by discipline. It can bring about tranquility, peace, stillness only by understanding its own activities, seeing its own ruthlessness. When the superficial conscious mind is thus fully aware of all its activities, through that understanding it becomes spontaneously quiet, not drugged by compulsion or regimented by desire. Then it is in a position to receive the intimation, the hints of the unconscious, of the many, many hidden layers of the mind, the racial instincts, the buried memories, the concealed pursuits, the deep wounds that are still unhealed. It is only when all these have projected themselves and are understood, when the whole consciousness is unburdened, unfettered by any wound, by any memory whatsoever, that it is in a position to receive the eternal. If you are not aware of all your responses all the time, if you are not fully conscious, fully cognizant of your daily activities, what you do has no meaning, however noble your intentions are. When there is self-knowledge, there is right thinking, and hence right action. When there is right action, there is no confusion, and therefore there is no supplication to someone else to lead you out of it. A man who is fully aware is meditating. If you really want to know yourself, you will search out your heart and your mind to know their full content, and when there is the intention to know, you will know. Then you can follow, without condemnation or justification, every movement of thought and feeling. We live in the so-called conscious mind, in the upper layer of the mind, and we never pay attention to the deeper unconscious mind, from which there is occasionally an intimation, a hint. That hint is disregarded, perverted, or translated according to a particular conscious demands at the moment. Most of us cling to what the conscious mind has accepted, because the conscious mind finds it convenient to adjust to certain facts. But the unconscious may rebel, and often does, and so there is conflict between the so-called conscious and the unconscious. There is in fact only one state, a state of being which is conscious, always of the past, never of the present. You are conscious only of things that are over. Watch your own hearts and minds, and you will see that consciousness is functioning between the past and the future, and that the past is merely a passage of the past to the future. Either the past is a means of escape from the present, which may be unpleasant, or the future is a hope away from the present. Therefore it is never capable of looking directly and impartially at any fact. It either condemns and rejects the fact, or accepts and identifies itself with the fact. Our thought is the conditioned response to the challenge of a fact. The more you respond according to the conditioning of a belief of the past, the more there is the strengthening of the past. That strengthening of the past is obviously the continuity of itself, which it calls the future. That is our consciousness, which is made up not only of the upper levels of the mind, but of the deeper layers as well. Such consciousness obviously cannot function at a different level, because it only knows those two movements of backwards and forwards. Most of us reject one particular form of conditioning, and then find another form, a wider, more significant or more pleasant conditioning. Such substituting is obviously not understanding life, life being relationship. Our problem is how to be free from all conditioning. You must be free to inquire and discover. Now, I say it is definitely possible for the mind to be free from all conditioning. Not that you should accept my authority. I say it because for me it is a fact, and I can show it to you verbally, but if you are to find the truth of it for yourself, you must experiment with it, and follow it swiftly. The analyzer who analyzes the thing which he is looking at, is himself part of the conditioned state, and therefore whatever his interpretation, his understanding, his analysis may be, it is still part of the background. To meet the challenge of the new, the mind must be new. To analyze the past, to arrive at conclusions through a series of experiments, to make assertions and denials and all the rest of it, implies, in its very essence, the continuance of the background in different forms. When you see the truth of that fact, you will discover that the analyzer has come to an end. Then there is no entity apart from the background. There is only thought as the background, thought being the response of memory, both conscious and unconscious, individual and collective. To be free, the mind must not only see and understand its pendulum-like swing between the past and the future, but must also be aware of the interval between thoughts. There is a period of silence which is not related to the thought process. If you observe, you will see that period of silence. That interval is not of time, and the discovery of that interval, the full experiencing of that interval, liberates you from conditioning, or rather, it does not liberate you, but there is liberation from conditioning. So, the understanding of the process of thinking is meditation. When there is only one thing in your life which is an avenue to ultimate escape, to complete forgetfulness of yourself, if only for a few seconds, you cling to it, because that is the only moment in which you are happy. Every other issue you touch becomes a nightmare, a source of suffering and pain, and so you cling to the one thing which gives you self-forgetfulness. The you wants to escape from it. You do not want to be a slave to it, so you invent, again from the mind, the idea of chastity, of celibacy, and you try to be celibate, to be chaste, through suppression, all of which are operations of the mind, to cut itself off from the fact. This again gives particular emphasis to the me, who is trying to become something, so again you are caught. So long as you are ambitious, politically, religiously, or in any way, so long as you are emphasizing the self, the thinker, the experiencer, by feeding him on ambition, whether in the name of yourself as an individual, or in the name of the country, of the party, or of an idea, which you call religion, so long as there is this activity of self-expansion, you will have a sexual problem. Your life is a contradiction, emphasis on the me, and forgetting the me. Sex is not a problem. The problem is this contradiction in your life, and the contradiction cannot be bridged over by the mind, because the mind itself is a contradiction. The contradiction can be understood only when you understand fully the whole process of your daily existence. Sex has its place, but when the mind gives it the predominant place, then it becomes a problem. When the mind understands its whole process and comes to an end, that is when thinking ceases. Then there is creation, and it is that creation which makes us happy. To be in that state of creation is bliss, because it is self-forgetfulness, in which there is no reaction as from the self. The mind denies love, and without love there is no chastity. It is because there is no love that you can make sex into a problem. As love is the unknown, we must come to it by discarding the known. The unknown cannot be discovered by a mind that is full of the known. To be full of emotion is obviously not love, because a sentimental person can be cruel when his sentiments are not responded to, when his feelings have no outlet. An emotional person can be stirred to hatred, to war, to butchery. When I accumulate resentment, and then deny that resentment, which you call forgiveness, it is not love. Sympathy, forgiveness, the relationship of possessiveness, jealousy, and fear, all these things are not love. They are all of the mind. Since you are possessive, Since you seek an end, a result, through devotion, through prayer, which makes you sentimental, emotional, naturally there is no love, no respect. If you really felt respect, you would be respectful to the lowest as well as to the so-called highest. You really love only when you do not possess, when you are not envious, not greedy, when you are respectful, when you have mercy and compassion. Love cannot be thought about, love cannot be cultivated, love cannot be practiced. The practice of love, the practice of brotherhood, is still within the field of the mind, therefore it is not love. When all this has stopped, then love comes into being. When you love, there is neither one nor many, there is only love. It is only when there is love that all our problems can be solved, and then we shall know its bliss and its happiness. Living is a process of continuity in memory, conscious as well as unconscious, with its various struggles, quarrels, incidents, experiences, and so on. All that is what we call life. In opposition to that is death, which is putting an end to all that. Having created the opposite, which is death, and being afraid of it, we proceed to look for the relationship between life and death. If we can bridge the gap with some explanation, with belief in continuity, in the hereafter, we are satisfied. We try to bridge the unknown and the unknown, and thereby try to find the relationship between the past and the future. One only knows oneself as a thinker, as an actor, with certain memories of misery, of pleasure, of love, affection, of various kinds of experience. One only knows oneself as being continuous. Otherwise, one would have no recollection of oneself as being something. Now, when that something comes to an end, which we call death, there is fear of the unknown. We do not want to know life, which includes death, but we want to know how to continue and not to come to an end. That which continues has no renewal. There can be nothing new, nothing creative, in that which has continuance. It is this ending that we dread, and we don't see that only in ending can there be renewal, the creative, the unknown, not in carrying over from day to day our experiences, our memories, and misfortunes. It is only when we die each day to all that is old that there can be the new. The man who seeks to find a relationship between life and death, to bridge the continuous with that which he thinks is beyond, is living in a fictitious, unreal world, which is a projection of himself. By giving a name to something, we have merely put it into a category, and we think we have understood it. We don't look at it more closely. If we do not give it a name, however, we are forced to look at it. If you do not give a label to people, you are forced to look at them, and then it is much more difficult to kill somebody. Then you are forced to consider your relationship with it, and with the action following. So, terming or giving a label is a very convenient way of disposing of anything, of denting, condemning, or justifying it. The centre, the core, is the memory of innumerable experiences of pleasure or pain verbalized. Watch it in yourself, please, and you will see that words have become much more important. Labels have become much more important than the substance, and we live on words. We are identified with the label, the house, the form, the name, the furniture, the bank account, our opinions, our stimulants, and so on, and so on. We are all those things being represented by a name. The things have become important, the names, the labels, and therefore the centre, the core, is the word. If there is no word, no label, there is no centre, because you have understood why you give labels to feelings and ideas. You are completely new. But what happens when you do not name? You look at an emotion, at a sensation, more directly, and therefore you have quite a different relationship to it, just as you have to a flower when you do not name it. You are forced to look at it anew. When you do not name a group of people, you are compelled to look at each individual face, and not treat them all as a mass. Therefore you are much more alert, much more observing, more understanding. You have a deeper sense of pity, love. But if you treat them all as a mass, it is over. The word anger has more significance than the feeling itself. Really, to find out, there must be a gap between the feeling and the naming. That is one part. When the mind is not thinking in terms of words, symbols, images, there is no thinker separate from the thought, which is the word. Then the mind is quiet. When the mind is really quiet, then the feelings which arise can be dealt with immediately. It is only when we give names to the feelings and thereby strengthen them that the feelings have continuity. They are stored up in the centre. When the mind is no longer the centre, as the thinker made up of words of past experiences, which are all memories, labels, stored up and put in categories, the mind is quiet. To follow through all its implications, to experience it, to see how the mind works, and thereby come to that point when you are no longer naming, which means that there is no longer a centre apart from thought. Surely this whole process is real meditation. To come to this point, there can be no judgment or justification from the beginning to the end. Not that this is an end. There is no end, because there is something extraordinary still going on. It is extraordinarily interesting to watch the process of the mind, how it depends on words, how the words stimulate memory, or resuscitate the dead experience and give life to it. In that process the mind is living either in the future or in the past. Therefore words have enormous significance, neurologically as well as psychologically. Watching the whole process frees the mind from its centre. Then, the mind being quiet, can receive that which is eternal. Our difficulty is for the mind not to proceed in the known. That can only happen when the mind understands itself, and how all its movement is from the past, projecting itself through the present to the future. It needs constant watchfulness, constant awareness of every movement of thought, not only when you are waking, but also when you are asleep. It must be a total process, not a sporadic, partial process. When the mind is silent, when it is no longer projecting itself into the future, wishing for something, when the mind is really quiet, profoundly peaceful, the unknown comes into being. You don't have to search for it. You cannot invite it. That which you can invite is only that which you know. Our problem is not how to seek the unknowable, but to understand the accumulative process of the mind, which is ever the known. That is an arduous task. That demands constant attention, a constant awareness in which there is no sense of distraction, of identification, of condemnation. It is being with what is. Then only can the mind be still. Life is it not, a series of challenges and responses, and if your response to a challenge is conditioned, limited, complete, then that challenge leaves its mark, its residue, which is further strengthened by another challenge. So there is constant residual memory, accumulation, scars, and with all these scars you try to meet the new, and therefore you never meet the new. Therefore you never understand. There is never a liberation from any challenge. If I want to understand you, you are modified, changed. I must be free of the picture of yesterday. To understand a challenge which is always new, I must also meet it anew. There must be no residue of yesterday. As each challenge arises, be aware of all the responses of yesterday, and, by being aware of yesterday's residue, memories, you will find that they drop away without struggle, and therefore your mind is fresh. Take any challenge, any small incident. Don't wait for some great crisis, and see how you respond to it. Be aware of it, of your responses, of your intentions, of your attitudes, and you will understand them. You will understand your background. I assure you, you can do it immediately if you give your whole attention to it. To understand what is, you have to be undisturbed, undistracted. You have to give your mind and your heart to it. It must be your sole interest at that moment, completely. Then, what is, gives you its full depth, its full meaning, and thereby you are free of that problem. Only when you are directly in relationship with the problem will you find the answer. To perceive truth needs no preparation. Preparation implies time, and time is not the means of understanding truth. Time is continuity, and truth is timeless, non-continuous. Understanding is non-continuous. It is from moment to moment, unresidual. It is easy, simple to understand, if you will only experiment with it. What will make me open to you is my intention to understand. I want to be open because I have nothing to hide. I am not afraid. Therefore I am open, and there is immediate communion. There is truth. To receive truth, to know its beauty, to know its joy, there must be instant receptivity, unclouded by theories, fears, and answers. We say that the mind should be occupied with noble things, with unselfishness, with generosity, with kindliness, with love. That is the pattern, the belief, the should be, the must, and we try to live accordingly. So there is a conflict set going between the projection of what should be and the actuality, the what is. And through the conflict we hope to be transformed. So long as we are struggling with what should be, we feel virtuous, we feel good. The mind lives in a world of trivialities, and a trivial mind creates a noble pattern. Creating a noble pattern is still trivial. If we are at all aware, if we are at all inquiring, we know our own particular trivialities, incessant talk, the everlasting chattering of the mind, worry over this and that, curiosity as to what people are doing or not doing, trying to achieve a result, groping after one's aggrandizement, and so on. The mind, being the result of memory, of time, is trivial in itself. Whatever it does, it's still trivial. It can speculate about God, it can devise political systems, it can invent beliefs, but it is still within the field of time. Its change is still from memory to memory. It is still bound by its own limitation. When the mind, having seen its trivialities, is fully aware of them, and so becomes really quiet, only then is there a possibility of these trivialities dropping away. In the awareness of the trivialities, which it has consciously and unconsciously built, the mind becomes quiet. In that quietness there is a creative state, and this is the factor which brings about transformation. That timeless state can come only when there is tremendous discontent, not the discontent that has found a channel through which it escapes, but the discontent that has no outlet, that has no escape, that is no longer seeking fulfillment. Without love, revolution has no meaning, for then revolution is merely destruction, decay, a greater and greater ever-mounting misery. When there is love, there is revolution, because love is transformation from moment to moment.